Okay, we are talking about theistic evolution, which is not that slide. But we're on Roman numeral 7 in your outline. We looked at 6, the creation versus evolution controversy, and what we noticed from that, what we came away from that, some of what we came away with was these are two diametrically opposed worldviews. One is materialistic, material-based. One is spiritual-based, whether you believe in evolution or creationism. And frankly, there's a large chasm, an uncrossable chasm between the two. And yet, because of academic pressure, if you will, there are those even in the religious world who see the need because it is unpopular, obviously, to, first of all, believe in God in general, in some areas. It's not everything. But even if you believe in God, it's very unpopular to believe in a literal 24-hour-a-day creation in a young earth. And so because of that unpopularity and pressures come from that, many in the religious world have attempted to fuse the two ideas together, and that's what we call theistic evolution. So, we're asking ourselves the question, does the Bible leave room for evolution? This idea that, God created everything. He started it, but then, evolution was just a mechanism that he used. Therefore, we can still say that man has been around for millions of years, and the universe has been around for billions of years, and try to make them consistent with one another. And what we're looking at is, no, the Bible does not leave room for that. And I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish anyway. I realize that there are people who believe in God and believe in evolution. But you're not going to get anywhere with the atheist, the atheistic evolutionist. He doesn't believe in God anyway. So coming up with some plan that somehow gives him evolution, but then says you still believe in God, well, he doesn't care. He's a materialist. And so I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish with that. And so in looking at this idea, there's only 3 places, of course, that you can put extra time in the biblical record. It would have to be either before the creation week. These are pretty obvious. You'd have to do it either before the creation week, during the creation week, or after the creation. And last week we spent our time, we were almost done with this, but let me make a few more observations. We were looking at that first idea, time before the creation week, the gap theory. Well, the gap theory is not that popular anymore because it doesn't make a lot of sense. If you read Genesis 1, verse 1 and 2, that's where you've got to stick all this stuff. And the Bible doesn't say anything about this idea that the earth was about form and void. So, actually you've got to stick all this time in between sentence 1 and sentence 2. That is, somehow God created the world, and then you had all these pre-Adamic men, and then at some point, Satan leads a rebellion on earth, destroys, lays waste to the earth, all those people are dead, and then you end up with the second sentence. God starts all over again. Well, God didn't say that. And that's a lot of fanciful theory to put between a period and the word be. And we looked at some reasons why that cannot be the case. Now, one of their number one arguments, of course, is that they try to make the argument that these Hebrew words for create and make are 2 different words. The word bara, which means create, and the word asa, which means make. And so they say, well, see, there's a difference in those 2 Hebrew words, and therefore, he created on one hand, and then he recreated, refashioned, made on the other hand. And basically what we looked at last week and we're not going to go back to it again. But all all the Old Testament Hebrew scholars say no, that these words are used interchangeably throughout the Old Testament. But specifically, if you look in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, you can see these words are used interchangeably. They mean the same thing. It's the same thing as if I told Ms. June, yesterday I cut my grass, and I told Marv yesterday I mowed the lawn. It's the same thing. It's just two different ways of saying it. And so you get down to some of these verses, let us make man in our image, and then it talks about creating man. And you see the beginning of chapter 2, the same kind of interchangeable language. Let's see. Verse 4, this is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made. Two different words meaning the same thing. And so that's a bogus argument and pretty easy to dispense with. So we talked about that a little bit. Then we mentioned, of course, that the gap theory contradicts Exodus 20 and verse 11. Now, in your outline, we're going to spend a lot of time. This is critical. But after this Roman numeral, the next three Roman numerals, Roman numeral 8, is Genesis 1 through 11, literal or historical. Roman numeral 9, man's sin and the flood. Roman numeral 10, the geologic timetable and the age of the earth. All of these are critical because theistic evolution and many in the religious world will take the position that Genesis 1 through 11 is poetry, right? It's Hebrew poetry, it's figurative, it's not literal, even though it's written in the same literal style as the rest of the Old Testament, except for those poetic passages in places like the Proverbs and Psalms and other places. And so they'll argue, well, 1 through 11 is not literal, and yet we can go all the way over to Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, and what does it say? What does Exodus 20, 11 say? Not in a poetical passage, for sure. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh. 6 days He made it. So it violates Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. There's also no biblical evidence for a rebellion by Satan on earth. I think we can make some pretty good, draw some pretty good conclusions from other passages in Scripture that Satan was created, an angel, righteous angel, a covering cherub perhaps, but a high angel, who because of his pride rebelled and was kicked out of heaven. But that's not got anything to do with the surface of the earth. And we had mentioned this as we left last week, that this theory is false because it implies that humans died before Adam and Eve. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 21, Romans 5, verse 12, chapter 8, 20, and 22, that death entered the world as a result of what? Adam's sin. Adam's sin. Death entered the world because of Adam's sin. And in this context, and let me say this, besides that, in Genesis 1:31, when God finished creating, He said everything was what? Good. It'd be hard to say if you were redoing things over a wasteland that had been destroyed because of a rebellion, and a bunch of other people had already lived and died. Of course, the Bible tells us that Eve is the mother of all what? Living. And so, there were no humans before Adam. He was, Paul also says, that he was the first what? In 1 Corinthians. He's the first man, right? He's the first man, 1 Corinthians 15:45. And so, no men, no pre-Adamic race. Adam was first. Now, by the way, and I don't want to get off on this, but when it says that sin or that death came through Adam, that because of Adam's sin or death entered the world, keep it in context in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We're talking about human death. Human death. I'm not making a commentary on whether or not there was plant or animal death before the first human death, or even before sin. That can be very possible. There was plant and animal death before. But as far as human death goes, it was brought into this world by Adam. So the gap theory is not very popular. It has too many problems. So probably the most popular theory, if you're a theistic evolutionist, is this next one. Time during the creation week, also known as the day-age theory. What does that say? Day-age theory. Absolutely. That the days of Genesis 1 were not literal 24-hour periods, but they are long eons of time. And they base this on the fact that the Hebrew word for day can have up to 7 different meanings, and on rare occasions can mean long periods of time. And so these days were millions or billions of years old, perhaps, we're talking. The problem, of course, is that a straightforward reading of Genesis 1, we're going to talk about this for several reasons, every way that God could have said in the Hebrew language that I'm talking about literal 24-hour days, he put in there. He actually put in this text every possible way that he could make that point. So, these first 3 are kind of technical, but the Hebrew word translated as day, Y-O-M. Anybody know how to pronounce Hebrew? Well, yeah, that's Yom to an American. That's like, that's the company that owns KFC. The Yom Center? No, it's the Yom Center. Every time this word is preceded by a numeral in non-prophetical passages, like Genesis 1, it always carries the meaning of a 24-hour day. Number 2, whenever this word appears in its plural form, Y-A-M-I-N, Yamim, in non-prophetical literature, it always means a literal day, and it is used that way 700 times in the Old Testament, and every single time it's used, it means a literal day in non-prophetic language or usage. So, if I go back to Exodus 20, verse 11, which we've already quoted, for in 6 days, Yamim, Y-A-M-I-M, plural, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. That's exactly what it means, 6 24-hour periods. There's some practical problems with this, though. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1, and let's notice some practical issues with. Let me mention one more, and I don't want to get in because this is important too. Go to Genesis 1:5. In Genesis 1:5, he says, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Evening and morning. The word Yom accompanies the words evening and morning over 100 times in non-prophetical passages in the Old Testament. Guess what? It always means a literal 24-hour day. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. This is just what Hebrew scholars tell us. And they have no dog in this hunt, I'm sure somebody. So, let's look at some practical considerations. Go down to verse 9. Well, let's see. No, verse 11. God said, this is what, the 3rd day? Let the earth bring forth what? Grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit, according to its kind. So on the 3rd day, God makes plants. What happened on the 5th day? Anybody know? Verse 14? No. No. For that. Light. Light. Now, I've got a bunch of plants. They're going to have to survive millions and billions of years without sunlight. How's that going to happen? Somebody else mentioned the animals, the life, the birds, and all that. Well, you know, some of these plants depend on insects for what? Pollination. Now they're going to survive for millions and billions of years without their symbiotic relationship. Be impossible. So, day 5 when insects were produced. So, it's tough, practically speaking. Then, if you're going to teach the day-age theory, you might as well call Jesus Christ a liar. Let's go to Mark chapter 10. You can also find this in Matthew chapter 19. And then we'll go to Romans 1. You call Paul the Holy Spirit a liar as well. Mark chapter 10, verse 6. Jesus is answering their questions about divorce and remarriage. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. How much older is the earth than people? How much older? Yeah. Depending on how you count it, 5 or 6 days. I would say that's from the beginning of creation. If you tell me it's several millions or billions of years, based on long eons of times, I'd say Jesus is being a little misleading. Let's go over to Romans chapter 1. Look down in verse 20. For since the creation of the world, how long? Since the creation, from the beginning, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being what? Understood. Some Bibles say perceived by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Who's without excuse? Who's without excuse?
Unbelievers.
Yeah, people in general. We're all without excuse because since the creation, these things have been clearly perceived. What's been clearly perceived and understood? His divine nature and power, His Godhood. Do animals perceive? Do they understand? Do they worship it? No. He's talking about people. People have been here since the beginning, clearly understanding, clearly perceiving that they didn't get here by accident, if they'll just look around. Go back to Genesis chapter 1. Look at verse 14. Again. Now tell me if these are eons or what. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, or the expanse is a better translation, to divide the day from the night. What? Divide the day from the... Does God know what day and night is? And let them be for signs. Now notice, let them be for signs and what? Seasons. And for days and years. So let me ask you this. If a day is a million or a gazillion years, what's a year? This is literal, not figurative. So again, we ask the question, if God wanted us to know that He created the world in 6 literal days, how else would He have done it? I guess He could have said, now for all you ignoramuses living several thousand years from now, that basically what He's saying is for all of you who do not want to believe, well, that's not the way He writes. The author of Genesis could have used other words for long periods of time. He could have employed a Hebrew word, D-O-R, which means a long period of time. Instead, he used the word day, modified it with the phrase evening and morning, put numerals before it, and in Exodus 20:11 made it plural. He used it. God used everything at His disposal in the Hebrew language to say, these are little 24-hour days. So somebody says, well, wait a minute. What about 2 Peter chapter 3? Well, let's go over there. People take that out of context, of course. And that's what's important, is to look at the context. 2 Peter 3 is talking about what? What's he talking about? Judgment. Remember, he talked about uniformitarianism earlier in the chapter. Remember what those people were saying? For since the fathers fell asleep, verse 4, all things continue as they were from the beginning. Well, that's what evolution says. The present's key to the past. It always goes on just like it is now. That's not true. For this they willfully forget. We're going to talk about this event, the greatest event in the history of the world, physically speaking, since the creation itself. This they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. But now everything is reserved for fire. But beloved, verse 8, this is the verse, now keep it in the context, we're talking about judgment. Do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day. You see there? A day with God, that's 1,000 years. Well, first of all, it didn't say a day is 1,000 years. What does it say? It's a simile, right? I even learned that in elementary school, like or as. Figure of speech. Like or as. So he didn't say a day is 1,000 years or vice versa. But what he does say here, in fact, what he does say is, number one, God does recognize the difference between a day and a year. He's the one that created it. He knows the difference. And he knows we are time-bound creatures. But what it says about God is, he's not a time-bound creature. He's eternal, he's spirit. When we talk about God, it's a difficult concept to understand. But when we talk about prophecy, the fact that God foretold something hundreds of years before it happened, you understand with God, there is no future. And there is no past. God says, I what? Am. I am in the present tense all the time. I see all of history all the time. It's just that simple. So, well, that's not simple. No, it's not. But there's no future to him, and there's no past to him. He is always in the present. But he has made time-bound creatures. And he knows what day means, and he knows what night means, and he knows what year means. But he's not bound by that. Just like we talked about God, all of these phrases, these accommodative phrases that we use for God, about how it says God came down or God drew near. God doesn't have to get closer to anything to investigate. He doesn't move from here to there to see a little closer. These are accommodative words we use for him. That's the same thing in 2 Peter 3:8. It's just talking about he's not bound by time.
This context is talking about his long suffering.
Absolutely. The context is talking about his faithfulness and his promises. And that is, look, you may think that the world's going to go on forever like it is, but it's not. And if you want evidence for that, look at the flood of Noah's day. But keep this in mind. He is coming back, and he is going to destroy this universe by fire, and he will keep his promise. That's the context. That's the point. And the only reason, and this passage tells you right now, that the only reason that we're here this morning, and that this earth spins this morning, and maybe will the rest of this day, we don't know, is because of one thing. God is what? Long-suffering. He's patient. He wants as many people to respond to his gospel as possible. And then one day, he's going to say, well, he even said the day of Noah, and look how patient he was then. He said, but my spirit will not always strive with man. And that's the reason we're here right now.
Greg,
Yeah.
when did they suppose that this long period of time for a day ended and it just became 24 hours?
I don't know. As long as I get past Genesis 1, I don't care. But that's a good question. It'd be a good question to ask. So that's the day. The last option is, of course, after the creation. And so you get this argument. Well, we look at the genealogies in the Bible. Jesus said, now we're here from the beginning of creation, right? So you can pretty much determine. I mean, secular history will tell you how long has it been since Jesus was here. Approximately. A little over 2,000 years. I mean, don't we use the term Annus Domini? And BC? So, at least normal people do. Others are using some other. So we know from secular history, it's been a little over 2,000 years since Christ. Secular history can also tell you that if you go back to Abraham, you're looking at a couple thousand years. Now you got to figure out is from go back to the creation, right? And the fact of the matter is, you can only get a few thousand years in there. And the Bible has, in Luke chapter 3, 55 generations listed between Jesus and Abraham. Sometimes people will say, well, there's gaps in the genealogy. Really? How do you know there's a gap? I'm serious. How would you know there's a gap in any particular list? How would you know? What would be the obvious answer? If I'm looking, there's all kinds of lists in the Bible. And if I say that one's got a gap in it, how would I know that?
Other lists.
Other lists. There'd be other lists. That's the only reason I would know there's a gap. So Luke 3 lists 55 generations, and we know that took about 4,000 years. He then lists 20 generations between Abraham back to Adam. Somebody says, well, why so few? Well, that answer is obvious. Why? Why only 20? But why only 20? Why did it take 55 generations to go from Jesus to Abraham? That's 2,000 years. Why? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people were living almost 1,000 years. It didn't take as many generations. So, if you take Genesis 5 and 11, and you list the ages of the fathers at the times of the births of the sons between Abraham and Adam, you know what you're going to come up with? About 2,000 more years. So you're looking at an earth that's 6,000, 7,000 years old. Definitely less than 10, based on the genealogies. Somebody says, well, I don't know about those genealogies. Well, go over to Jude, verse 14. Who was Jude anyway? Yeah, half-brother of Christ. Brother of James. Look at verse 14. Now, Enoch was what? The seventh from Adam. Well, Jude says Enoch was the seventh from Adam. If I go back to Genesis and I look at the list, what do I find? In Genesis 5, verse 21. Where is Enoch listed? He's number what? Guess what? He's number 7. So, Jude says Enoch was number 7. Genesis says Enoch was number 7. So I know there are no gaps between the first 7 patriarchs. So that only leaves me 13 generations, and I can put these gaps between Enoch and Abraham. So basically I would have to fit about 300,000 years per generation. So what you're telling me is that the Bible listed the first 7 correctly. Literally. And then the next 13, all of a sudden they became 290,000. That's poor biblical exegesis. Well, we'll talk about that later. Mark's talking about various, if you look at Roman numeral, if you have your outlines with you, if you look at Roman numeral 10, geologic timetable of the age of the earth, we're going to talk about all the different scientific evidences for a young Earth that you ever hear about. We're not going to go through all those, I just listed a bunch, but we'll hit some high points. But statistics is the easy one. But I'll tell you this, from what I've read, based on population growth, if people have been here for, what was it, 3.5 million years, okay. According to the math, you couldn't fit all of the human beings in the known universe. Not just on this ball. I'm talking about if we were all packed like sardines in the entire universe, you couldn't fit us. So, yeah, I got a problem with the math, that's for sure. Theistic evolution. Well, I want to talk about, as we get into these next few sections on the age of the earth, when we talk about Genesis 1 through 11 and its historicity and the flood and the age of the earth from a scientific perspective, I wanted to mention why this is so important. I saw an article recently, I brought it in here with me, I was going to hit some high points. And you can look it up yourself, this is fairly new. Well, October of 19 of this year. It was written by Kevin Kane, who's an attorney, and he's an auxiliary writer for Apologetics Press. And so it's on their website. But the title of the article is called, "Why Are We Losing Them When They Leave for College?" And he opens up talking about, all these statistics, and you talk about the situation, the parent says, I raised my child, we brought them to church every Sunday, every Wednesday, they, were active, they came to Bible class, they were active in all the youth group activities, they went to church camp, blah, 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 I don't know how it goes, and then as soon as they leave home, but faith is gone. What happened? Preacher, elder, y'all told me if I did all that, they would make fun. And that happens over and over and over again. And he's got some studies here. Now, these studies are about the Christian denominational world that you might call it Christendom. It's not just to church. But he asked, are the statistics as bad as we have heard? The short answer is yes. So Campus Renewal out of Austin, Texas estimates that 60 to 80% of denominational students leaving for college leave their faith behind as well. Respected pollster George Barna interviewed 22,000 adults and over 2,000 teenagers in 25 separate surveys. This is where he gets a lot of these statistics. They were trying to determine not only how many were leaving, but why. That was the purpose of the Barna study. It's some pretty interesting stuff. But the study came out that 95% of these students attended church regularly during elementary and middle school. 55% during high school, and only 11% still go in college. Now, here's the surprising thing about that study. Everybody thought that teenagers were leaving when they left home. They're checking out, even if they're coming in person, but a lot of them are coming at all. They're checking out by the time they get to high school. They get out of middle school, their faith is gone. And so this study is trying to figure out why. And so they made a comparison between those who regularly attended Bible class and those who did not. Now keep in mind, this is a comparison between those who went to Bible class, those who did not. Now listen to this. There's another shocking statistic. The ones who regularly attended Bible class are more likely not to believe all accounts or stories in the Bible are true or accurate. They're more likely to doubt the Bible because it's written by man and has errors. They're more likely to accept that gay marriage and abortion should be legal. They're more likely to believe that God used evolution. They're more likely not to believe the earth is less than 10,000 years old. They're more likely to believe that dinosaurs died before people. We'll talk about dinosaurs, but certainly dinosaurs lived at the same time people did. More likely to believe that good people don't need to go to church. You say, man, you'd think that would be the other way around. And so they go even deeper. And here's what they found, is that as leaders in these various religious groups have questioned and chipped away at the historical accuracy of Genesis 1 through 11, what is the only conclusion that any young mind can come to? When you tell them that Genesis 1 through 11 is not historically true, where is that going to lead them? What path? It's just not accurate at all.
Yeah.
And if it's not accurate historically and factually, what does that mean for me spiritually? What's it going to do for me spiritually if I can't rely upon it historically or factually? Why would I care about what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John or Paul say if I can't depend upon what Moses wrote? They asked some young adults who said, they had another study, between young adults who said they planned to come back one day when they had kids. You ever heard people say that? Well, I go back to church when I have kids. And others say, no, I'm not coming back at all. Of the ones that said that they were coming back, 76% believed all the Bible was inspired. Of the ones that said, no, I'm not coming back, only 42%. Do you believe in creation as stated in the Bible? 92% that are coming back, yes. The 47.8%, no, that aren't coming back. I mean, you see the correlation. You believe in the creation of Adam and Eve in the garden? The ones that are coming back, yeah, most of them say yeah. The ones that aren't, no. You believe the Bible and its accounts are accurate? Again, same kind of statistics. And so they doubt the accuracy of the Bible. Now let's think about it. In 1859, Darwin comes out with Origin of Species, and 12 years later, his other book, The Descent of Man. And so many of the religious institutions in England, of course, embraced this, compromised what they taught about creation. And now when you go to Europe, I haven't been to Europe, but I know some of you have been to Europe. And what are some of the places you like to visit? What are so beautiful? Churches. Full of old, beautiful churches, full of art. But not full of what? People. Europe is secular. Still got religion there. The same way the socialists and the leftists in this country who love Europe want us to be just like them, leading us down the same path. So it's a pretty slippery slope. So they come to this conclusion that the first chip to fall in this slippery slope is the belief that the earth is billions of years old. When someone believes that this earth is billions of years, you're on your way down. So, he said, notice the growing level of disbelief in the statistics below as they bottom out on the subject of the age of the earth. 77% believe in Noah's Ark and the flood, 75% in Adam and Eve, 62% that Abraham fathered Isaac when he was 100, 60% believe in the Tower of Babel, but only 20% believe that the earth is less than 10,000. For those surveyed who did not believe in the accuracy of the Bible, the Barna study asked the questions, reasons why they didn't believe. 24% said they were written by men, 18% said the Bible was not translated correctly, 15% said the Bible contradicts itself, 14% said science shows the world is old, 11% that the Bible contains errors, 4% evolution proves the Bible wrong, and there were some other reasons. But the point he was making is that 82%, you add those percentages up, basically doubt the authority and the accuracy of the Bible. So, somebody says, well, it doesn't matter if you believe the earth is billions of years old or a few thousand years old. Yeah, it does matter. Because either you believe what God says or you don't. About everything. So that's why we're going to spend a little time on this topic over these next three, or all of basically page 4 in your outline, about Genesis 1, and then of course the flood, and then the age of the earth from a scientific perspective. Y'all know that Charles Darwin's only degree was in what? Theology. That was his only degree. He was not a scientist. But he did study some geology and biology while he was getting that degree. And in his autobiography, he said this. I'll leave you with this. I had gradually come by this time to see that the Old Testament, from its manifestly false history of the world, and from its attributing to God the feelings of a revengeful tyrant, was no more to be trusted than the sacred books of the Hindus and the beliefs of any barbarian. So before he ever got to the Galapagos Islands and came up with his theory of evolution, Darwin had to turn his back first on what? The historical accuracy of the Old Testament. Yeah, he had some other issues too. He had a death in the family. We've already talked about that. So we'll pick up there next week and look at Genesis chapter 1 through 11.